best position from various positions. In the famous hadith, إِنَّ الْحَلَالَ بَيِّنٌ وَإِنَّ الْحَرَامَ بَيِّنٌ وَبَيْنَهُمَا أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ لَا يَعْلَمُهُنَّ كَثِيرٌ مِّنَ النَّاسِ. Between the halal and the haram are these gray areas that not many people know. Imam Nawawi and others say not many people know it are the muhaqqiqun amongst the ulama. They're the ones that know these gray areas. Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu is an example of that. So Ahmed Zarruq and others have said قَدْ حَكَمْ بِهِ عَلَى التَّمْسَاح. Tamsah means kidhib. It's one of the many words the Arabs have for kidhib, for a lie. Is muharram. It's prohibited to bring some benefit unless there is it's a means by which the truth is made manifest. And one could also take from this the idea of using fiction as moral teachings. For instance, many of the great fiction writers create stories that are essentially lies. They're fables. They're made up from their imagination, but they use them in order to teach us something about the human condition. And so what he's saying is that normally lying is prohibited, but if there's a way in which the truth can manifest in that. And then he gives the example of the tis'un wa tis'una, which comes from the Sad in the chapter in the Quran, which is the 38th chapter, when Dawood alayhi salam, the Prophet Dawood, وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ نَبَأُ الْخَصْمِ إِذْ تَصَوَّرُوا الْمِحْرَابِ, did the news of the two that were arguing when they came into his palace, and when he saw them, فَزِعَ مِنْهُمْ إِذْ دَخُلُوا عَلَيْهِ. When Dawood alayhi salam saw them, he was shocked to see them, and then they just said, لَا تَخَافْ, don't be afraid. And they explained that they were basically two khasman. They had a disagreement about something. بَغَى بَعْضُنَا عَلَى بَعْض. Some of us have oppressed others. And then they asked him to be an arbiter, to judge between them. These, according to Ibn Juzay, all the mufassirun say these were two angels that came in. Now obviously angels aren't going to have any arguments about anything, but they said, we're disputing amongst each other and we want you to فَحْكُمْ بَيْنَنَا, right, to decide between us. And so in order for them to understand the right path here. And so basically the two angels then proceed to tell him that one of them has 99 ewes and the other only has one. So he says, my brother here has 99 ewes, I only have one, and he wants me to give his mind to add to his, to make it 100. And so he's saying, is this fair or not? Now, there's a khilaf about what that story is referring to, but there's an agreement that it relates to something that happened to Dawood alayhi salam. Now there's a story in the Israeli tradition, the Jewish tradition, I mean not Israeli like a political, but the Israeliyat, in the Jewish tradition, which is totally unacceptable from a Muslim perspective, because many of the stories in the Old Testament about the prophets, the Muslims don't agree with, that happened to Nuh alayhi salam, or to Lot, or to David or Solomon. So the stories that are told that in any way diminish the stature and the honor of the prophets are completely rejected and unacceptable. But some of the ulama do talk about that story. Others say that the Prophet ﷺ, Dawood, whatever happened, Allah did not go into detail about it, but just gave this example. And some say it was over a jariyah, which was permissible for him, but it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to show him that it was what's called khilaf al-awla, that it would have been better not to have done it. So he uses this example, and then when he says, when they tell him that, Dawood alayhi salam says, that your brother has wronged you in asking you for this na'ja. And then he says, and it's very common that people, when they're the khulata, people that are working together or in business together, it's very common for one of them to oppress the other. So he gives this wisdom that very often when people are working together, some will oppress the others. And then Dawood realizes that Allah was showing him this for him to see from himself. So he says, Astaghfirullah, he asks forgiveness, and in the ayah, it's one of the sujood that he goes into sajda for that. So he uses that as an example of the angels teaching him through this story. And this is obviously the basis for a lot of teaching traditions. You have stories that teachers will use that might not necessarily have happened or not, but it's not important whether they happened or not. And this is the foundation of a lot of mythology, is based on that the story, whether it happened or not, is not the point. It's the wisdoms that come out of the story. And so from that perspective, he's saying that it was permissible. And also an example of that is when Ibrahim alayhi salam was asked about the idol, because he went and smashed the idols, and then he left the big one and he put the axe around the neck of the big one. So when his people went and saw that, and they remembered Ibrahim had been speaking about the idols, they went and got Ibrahim alayhi salam, and Ibrahim said, "Bal fa'aluhu kabiruhum hada," the big one did it. There's a khilaf about this, but on Yom Qiyamah, Ibrahim does not take the shafa'ah. When people will go to Ibrahim alayhi salam to intercede, they go to Adam and he says, "I can't do it." They go to each one of the prophets. When they get to Ibrahim, he says he can't do it because of these three, and they're called kidhibat, but they're not lies. What they are is ma'arid in Arabic, because the Prophet ﷺ said, "Fi ta'ridi manduhatun an al-kidhib," in double entendres, in prevarications, what's called Toria in Arabic rhetoric. There is a way to get out of lying. So the Prophet ﷺ, for instance, when the man wanted to kill him, he asked him, "Who are you from?" And he meant which tribe. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Ana min al-ma'," I'm from water. The man thought he wasn't a Qurayshi, it was some tribe he didn't know about, and he left him alone. So that's an example where the Prophet wasn't lying. He said, "Ana min al-ma," and that's not a lie. It's true. We're all from water. So those are examples where he says, if there's a reason to do it, then it's permissible, because it's not a good thing to lie. And so Ibrahim alayhi salam, they differ on what he meant. Some say he pointed with his thumb in the books, because by the dominant opinion amongst the people of Aqidah, the people of Tawheed, the dominant opinion in Usul al-Din is that the prophets cannot do kabira, and they cannot do saghira, right? Now, some of them say that they differ before their prophecy and after their prophecy, but generally what they do is khilaf al-awla, which is khilaf al-awla is a third category, because you have the kabira, and then you have the saghira, and then you have something what's called khilaf al-awla. It could be makruh or khilaf al-awla. Khilaf al-awla is where you do a thing and you should be doing something else instead of it. So it's a preferable thing to do in that situation. And that's an example of abasa wa tawalla an ja'ahu al-a'ma, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Prophet, "You frowned and turned away." It wasn't that he was doing something wrong, but Allah was telling him, here's a better thing that you could be doing, because he was in da'wah to a person, but the person wasn't really that interested, and so the Prophet ﷺ was told, no, you should be doing this instead. And that's the extent of what the prophets can do. So Ibrahim could not have been telling a lie. And so when he said that, some say it was sarcastic, istihza, like if somebody says to you, for instance, they come in and you wrote something very beautiful and they can't write and they say, oh, did you do that? And then you say, no, you did it. And it's not, you're not lying, you're just being sarcastic. And so he's like saying, no, dummies, the big one did it. You know, in other words, who else did it? Or what he was saying was, the big one did it, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the destroyer of idols. And that if they can't see, what he was trying to teach them was, if that big idol doesn't want the little idols around, because he's the biggest idol in town, and he doesn't want the little idols around, and you can't see that it's logical that the big one would want to knock the other ones down, so that he's the only one they worship. So he was teaching them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a jealous God, that he doesn't want to be worshipped with others, and that would be logical to them if they could understand that. So and also when he looked he looked into the stars and he said, I'm sick. They used to use the stars for astrological predictive purposes. So he looked up into the stars when they asked him to come to the party, and he said, I'm sick. But he wasn't using the stars as the way to indicate that he was sick. He was merely doing a Toria to them like that. So these are examples, and all of the prophets, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he says that he accuses them of stealing, that was actually, they stole him from his father. So they did commit theft. They stole their brother and took him away from the father. So the prophets don't lie, but he's saying that you can say something that is not true if it's in order to manifest the truth. Now this gets into another, obviously in our ethical tradition, you have different forms of ethics. The dominant form of ethics in the Islamic tradition is what's called virtue ethics. And you'll find this comes out of the Quran, and the Hadith is very clearly substantiating a virtue ethic tradition. And then obviously the influence of Aristotle's book on the Muslims, Imam al-Ghazali, Raghib al-Isfahani, Ibn Miskawayh, Ibn Hazm, all the great moral ethicists of the Islamic tradition used the template that Aristotle put in the Book of Ethics, but they really created their own based on the Quran and the Hadith. But there are other types. Situational ethics is another type of ethics, deontological ethics, command theory. If you look at the Islamic tradition, there are elements in all of these. So there are situational ethics in Islam. There are times when it's permissible to tell a lie. If you're going to save an army or something, if somebody asks you where the army is and you say, oh, they're over there, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said, al-harbu khud'a. So that's what he's basically explaining, that there are situations where it is permissible, but generally it's not. So go ahead, next one. There's no sound. Yeah.
واغتفروا الكذب بالزيادة مبالغا بمستحيل عادة. Also rendered overlooked is a hyperbolic lie in which the hyperbole is conventionally deemed impossible, leaving no ambiguity.
So for instance, if you say, I've told you 1,000 times, you might not have told them more than 10 times. But when you say, I told you 1,000 times, you're using hyperbole. But if you tell somebody, I called you at least 10 times, and you only called them 3 times, then that's a lie, because 10 times is possible. But if you said, Ya akhi, I called you 1,000 times, and you weren't there, he knows you called him several times, because it's hyperbole. I mean, there are people that take things literally, so you have to be careful with that. Because there are people that, really? 1,000 times? You must be exhausted. So that's basically what he's saying, that it's permissible if it's understood to be something mustahil adatan, that in normal circumstances they would know that it's just not possible. نعم.
وعندما يخشى نفور ولدي أو زوجة جاز ارتكاب الفند. لكن بلا تمسح لأخذ ما ليس له أو منع حق لهما وإن تعين طريقا لكذب عن بدن أو مال أو عرض كذب والخلف إن يرجى به صلاح للبين هل يندب أو يباح.
نعم.
Acceptable also is a white lie when one fears the alienation of one's spouse or one's child. In such a case, prevarication is permitted, but this does not mean embellishing the matter through subterfuge in order to take what is not his or to deprive people of some right due to them. Lying actually becomes binding upon one as a way of warding off physical and material harm, as well as harm to personal dignity. There is some difference concerning lying that is used hoping for the resolution of conflict between parties. It is either recommended or merely permissible.
Right. So basically, if a child, for instance, is begging you for something, the ulama say that it's permissible to say, I'll get it to you later, even if you're not intending that. Imam Malik was asked about that, and he said, La khayra fil kidhab. There's no good in lies. So generally, it's not good to do that even with children. It's very important to teach them truthfulness. But it is permissible. It's not considered a lie if you tell that. In terms of the spouse, what the ulama say is that if your spouse says, I'm looking old, aren't I? And you say, no, you look, like a spring chicken. And you don't really believe that's also permissible to say that. Or, do you think I'm beautiful? If you don't want to get a divorce, then, you better answer that correctly. And it's not a multiple choice question. There's only one answer. So that's basically what he's saying to do. And then he says, but you can't basically butter somebody up and flatter them with false words in order to get something. The I love you man syndrome, So you want something from the person, you basically start telling them how wonderful they are and how much you like them. And by the way, can I borrow your car or something like that? So and people do that too. So when ta'ayyana tariqan and then this basically again is about warding off harm. In situational ethics, it is permitted to do certain things that would not normally be permitted because of the situation. And generally, we're not a situational ethics tradition. But there are times, and this is the reasonableness of Islam, there are times when that's permissible. So normally, in deontological ethics or Kantian ethics, you have what's called the categorical imperative, which is the idea that you should never do anything that you would not want to be universalized. So the idea, you should never tell a lie, because imagine if everybody told lies, there'd be never any virtue in the world. And that's basically the idea. But if somebody's going to steal your money and you say, I don't have any money, then that would be permissible to do that in a situation like that. What he says here, وَالْخُلْفُ إِنْ يُرْجَ بِهِ الصَّلَاحُ لِلْبَيْنِ. The Prophet ﷺ in a hadith in the Jami' Saghir, the Prophet ﷺ said, لَيْسَ الْكَذَّابَ الَّذِي يُصْلِحُ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. He's not a liar. And kadhab is really somebody who lies a lot. But he wouldn't be put down as a liar. Because the idea, the Prophet ﷺ said that, إِنَّ الْكَذِبْ يُؤَدِّي إِلَى الْفُجُورِ, that lying leads to fujur, and fujur leads to the fire. Sidq leads to birr, and birr leads to paradise. Truthfulness leads to righteousness. Righteousness leads to paradise. So what he's saying there is there's a khilaf about that. Some of the ulama say that it's not a lie if you say something to rectify between people. And some say that you should not. You should say something that's truthful or based in truthfulness to do that. So that's a khilaf issue.